9 years ago today, a musician by the name of Mount Eerie released an album called A Crow Looked at Me. An album that was a raw expression of the feelings that he was feeling after his wife's unfortunate death from cancer. And it's an album I have been seeing talked about a lot recently. And I want to give my opinions on the album here because I think I think rating this album is offensive in and of itself. And I want to explain what I mean by that. I want to somewhat influence people to, if they've rated the album, remove their rating because I think it's offensive to rate this album. Now, in case you don't know the album, it is really simply that. It's an album with, I'm not going to give an example because I don't want to even have to hear it again. I've heard this album twice, and it's two more times that I needed to hear. And I'll get into that in a second. But basically, what inspired me to make this video was I saw a poll. I might put an image of that poll in here. And it was asking, what was a better album? Damn by Kendrick Lamar, A Crow Looked at Me by Mount Eerie, Flower Boy by Tyler the Creator, and some Earl Sweatshirt album. Or maybe it was Vince Staples. Yeah, I think it was Vince Staples. It was the Fish album. And Damn was the overall winner of it. It was like 50% or 60% Damn, and 25% Mount Eerie or something like that. Which I think is absurd. Not because I'm like, oh, I'm surprised it lost. I'm not surprised because Mount Eerie's album, A Crow Looked at Me, isn't really something meant to be listened to. It really was just him expressing his emotions at the time, which I think is really valuable. I don't think that he should have never released it. I think him expressing himself to the world was important, but it wasn't meant to be commercial. There was no really singles that came out, or it wasn't really promoted really. At least to my knowledge, it wasn't, because it wasn't something that he was releasing to be really good. Which, I mean, objectively, I mean, you can argue what is objective, but really it's not that great of an album. Musically, I mean, it's just acoustic guitars. But the what he went through making that album, sitting in the room that your wife died while you have a now motherless child that you had with that wife, and using her instruments to record music in a raw, unfiltered form, expressing your grief and sorrow while having to see a reminder of your loss every day of your life. It's heartbreaking. And it should not be compared to Flower Boy by Tyler the Creator. It's not something that should be compared. And I think it's offensive to rate the album in general because it wasn't something really made to be musical. I think an argument against this is, oh, why'd you put it on vinyl? Which the reason he really did is because he wanted, I'm pretty sure to my knowledge, he preferred digital, he preferred non-digital media compared to digital, because it felt more real, which I can understand that, especially when you're recording something that is raw and genuine, having it on vinyl or whatever. I would never buy it on vinyl. I would never buy that on vinyl. I don't even want to listen to it ever again. I've listened to it 2 times, and it's really not something and really listen to, which now I say that I'm actually really conflicted on if it should be listened to, because on one hand, it's an album that, like, you can sympathize with people more, or not people more, but him. You can, have a lot of sympathy for him, and like kind of obviously you're not gonna, unless you've like lost someone in a similar fashion. I mean, they were married for like 12, 14 years or so. I mean, being able to be that attached to someone and then losing them while having a daughter with them is absolutely heartbreaking. So I think it's offensive to rate the album a 0. Obviously, I don't think there's any explanation needed for why I think it's offensive to be really rating a 0. But I want to explain why I think the most shocking to people is I think it's offensive to rate it a 100. When I first listened to it, I rated it a 100 because I was like, whoa, this is like raw expression. This is like insane. But it's actually, I think it's actually offensive to rate it a 100. Now, obviously, you might not immediately understand why that's offensive, which I'm going to explain in a second. But I also think it's offensive to rate it a 90, an 80, a 70, because I think he wasn't intending for this album to be, like, commercially listened to be listened to by, like, fans repeatedly in general. And I don't think it should have a number on it, because whenever someone is rawly expressing their emotions, there shouldn't be a number attached to it. It is a difference when Tyler, the Creator, spends however long he works on an album and he's like, okay, you live in my dream state, and he like records all these songs and he's like, I'm gonna release this as a single, I'm gonna make a music for this. Mount Eerie didn't do that. He didn't mean for, oh, I want Fantano to give this a 70. He didn't mean for that. He simply wanted to express his emotions, which is why there was no single for it, really. There's no music video for any of the songs, because it wasn't really meant for that. It was meant for him to just explain how he was feeling over simple guitar, because he's a musician. That's what he does, and he wanted a way to express his, like, sorrow. And, like, try to somewhat get over his wife's death by making this album using her instruments in the room that she died to try to, I guess in a sense, get a better connection with her. So I think rating it a 100 and going, oh, this is amazing, and rating this the same as like To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar. To Pimp a Butterfly is an amazing album. It tells an amazing story, an amazing narrative, etc. But Kendrick Lamar actually meant for that to be listened to and like, listened to on a like professional level, and to give this raw, unfiltered thing the same rating as To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar, or say it's better than all these albums that other artists spent a lot of hard work on. I don't think Mount Eerie really spent a lot of effort on the album. I mean, he probably did spend effort on the album. I can only imagine how hard it was for him to record those songs, especially in the same room that your wife of like 14 years died in. I can only imagine how hard it was to record, but it's a little different. It's difficult on an emotional level rather than experience level, which that's why I don't think it should be rated a 100. And obviously rating a 90 or rating it an 80 is like, oh, you're grieving and you're like doing it unfiltered. I'm gonna give you 10 points because I don't like necessarily how you talked about it on this song. It just seems really petty, and it seems like I just don't think it should be rated. I genuinely don't think it should be rated. And I had this conversation. I had a somewhat wrong conversation because one of my friends disagreed with my opinion that it shouldn't be rated. And they were like, oh, this album is depressing. Do you think it should be rated? Which I would have to do more research on it, probably. But I might agree that it probably shouldn't be rated. Now, it kind of depends on what the artist was intending. Because the thing about this one specifically I can speak on this. Other stuff I might agree, hey, this probably shouldn't be rated, but I can specifically agree with this, that a guy who releases an album, not self-promoting it a lot, after losing a wife of 12 years and having a child who is now motherless, releasing it on their own label, and specifically not advertising it a bunch, probably doesn't want the album to be rated, and is definitely not trying to make a profit off of it, and is just trying to get their emotions, like, out of their chest. I mean, How to Leave Town by actually, maybe other Car Seat Headrest albums too. Those are, like, really depressing, and there's, like, some stuff in there that I think, oh, wow, that's actually crazy that, like, happened, and, like, it would suck if someone rated that a 0, but at the same time, I think that might be more promoted. However, that might not be the case. Maybe that was also something that they didn't want, like, oh, give it a 0, 100, or whatever. I'm not certain. I would have to do maybe not research, but look into that. However, with this album specifically, I don't think it should be rated by anyone, any rating whatsoever. Because I don't even think Mount Eerie thinks it's an amazing album. It really was not, like, a musically amazing album. It wasn't meant to be. It would be like rating Anne Frank's Diary of a Young Girl a 90. It was a 13-year-old girl documenting her experience in a not a concentration camp. My bad. I wrote an essay on this. Narrating living in a secret annex during, like, the Holocaust, and, like, in life-threatening danger. So that shouldn't be rated a 90. It was a 13 to 15-year-old girl writing in diaries. It shouldn't be, like, rated just like people rate other books. It shouldn't be like, oh, I think it's like a 9 out of 10. It was like, it just really shouldn't be rated. Which, I guess it's a little less crazy to rate that a 9 out of 10 than this, because, I mean, it's a child. But I think it's crazy to rate a child's work. I mean, she didn't choose what was published, because she died before it was published. It was posthumously released. So, I'm trying to think of any other points. I really didn't plan this video out ahead. I'm recording this, at 8:20 on the 9th anniversary, which, obviously the 9th anniversary isn't something you usually celebrate, but really the reason I made this video was because I saw a poll comparing it, and not only do I not think it should be rated 100, it shouldn't be compared to any albums, and it should be completely out of the conversation of best albums of 2017, best albums of 2010, best albums of all time. It should be out of the conversation. It's okay to like the album, and it's okay to not like the album. It's okay to be like, this is too depressing, this is too dark for me, because it is. I mean, it's a really depressing album. The only 2 times I've listened to that album was during really depressing moments of my life, which that didn't help it at all. So, it's not really an album that should, like, I think I'm going to call this video, Shut the Fuck Up About A Crow Looked at Me, which you should. You should shut up about it. It's not an album he meant, or in what I don't think he meant for this album to be talked about 9 years later, compared to Flower Boy and some rap songs by Earl Sweatshirt and Damn by Kendrick Lamar. Great albums, by the way, but should be out of the conversation completely. And Fantano should not be rating it a 9 out of 10 and saying death is real, because death is real, and there's not a number on death. There shouldn't be a number on death. And how well you describe your emotions and describe how well you're grieving your wife's death. There shouldn't be a number on that. So, I left a comment on that poll, actually, and I was like, this is really disrespectful. You're comparing Flower Boy and some other albums to an album that, like, does not deserve to be compared to these. Like, no wonder why it lost. Probably most people who voted on the other ones didn't hear it, which I'm fortunate for them in a sense. The other sense is, oh, they don't even realize they just rated an album about someone's wife dying lower than a song with pop songs on it. Which, no offense to Fireboy, it's a great record, but Fireboy doesn't have songs about death being real and having a child now motherless due to cancer. It simply doesn't. And I mean, that doesn't mean I necessarily think just because an album is depressing you shouldn't rate it, but specifically when it's in this context, it should not be rated. So what I think should happen is I think maybe at least some people are like, hey, I think he might be right, and then they remove their rating. It would be great if there was like a chain effect. The best case scenario would be for it to be like locked on album of the year to rate, but that's not going to happen. I mean, I do believe in freedom of speech genuinely. I do believe in freedom of speech. However, I just personally think it's best for I just think it's disrespectful to rate it in a sense. And I think just like it's, freedom of speech to like say something racist, but I'm not comparing this to racism. However, I just simply think it should be like, not encouraged to rate the album any rating. Once again, obviously it's more offensive to rate it a 0 out of 100, but I still think it's an offensive act to rate it a 100, which is why I removed my rating for Mount Eerie. I gave a little summary on Album of the Year on why I removed my rating. I also removed my rating for Now Only, which is an album I don't see talked about a lot, even when I do, which, I mean, I would prefer neither one to be talked about, really. I mean, there are some ways you can talk about it in an educational standpoint. When I say shut up about it, I'm not saying never talk about it. I'm saying don't compare it to other albums and probably refrain from mentioning it like a bunch in music circles unless there's like a really important reason for mentioning it. It should not be mentioned like, oh, which is better? 1989 by Taylor Swift or A Crow Looked at Me by Mount Eerie. Oh, make your votes. Oh, would you look at that? 1989 won with a 94% win rate. Like, that should not happen. Because they should not be compared. A Crow Look at Me shouldn't be compared to anything. Really. Really, I don't think it should be compared to anything. I have yet to hear a more heartbreaking and depressing album than A Crow Looked at Me. I have yet to hear a more depressing album. Which, it is hard to make a more depressing album knowing the context behind this album. So, I'm looking through my messages right now with this person that I had this argument with my friend. There was this argument that was like, if I was basically just like saying in this context, and they were saying if it was a breakup album, would you be willing to rate it? If it was like the same thing and being willing to rate it. I mean, like, probably, because number one, it probably wouldn't be as like under promoted, but also there's a difference between breaking up in a girlfriend, boyfriend, partner relationship or whatever than there is of losing a wife, not being divorced, losing a wife to death. And I don't think them repeatedly asking me if I think it's a good album is really helpful for the argument of this should be rated, because, like, saying is it musically good, like, you cannot like the album and say it's musically trash. I'm not going to really argue that it's, like, musically amazing. However, that doesn't mean you should rate it a 30, 40, 50, 60, 0, anything, because it shouldn't be something rated on, like, I would say the guitar's a 4 out of 10, and it shouldn't be like nitpicked because it wasn't meant to be nitpicked. It was meant to be raw. It was meant to be like unfinished in a sense, which is why I don't think like people should just be able to like rate it like a 6 out of 10 because they don't like it, because that's disrespectful. It's disrespectful, and um, I don't really know. I feel like I'm going in circles here because like it's okay to say you don't like it, but you should specify. I don't like it, but I respect the fact that he like decided to do this and give his raw and like rest in peace his wife. Even though I don't like the album, it's too depressing for me or whatever. Like, it should just like not be like. Really, you shouldn't even have to say it's trash in general. You shouldn't have to like nitpick it in general or talk about if you like think it's a good album or not. Because the only time it should, I don't. There are certainly important aspects of it, like talking about like how to deal with grief and how to cope with like depression and losing a loved one. Certainly, it is somewhat beneficial because if you're going through a hard time, some people might find it helpful to hear how other people like talk about how they're going through that. But at the same time, I have a feeling 90% of people who like fully listen to the album immersed end up not happier than they were before, because it really is a depressing album, and it really is heartbreaking to listen to because of just simply how raw and emotional it is. I really don't have much to say. I mean, thank you for watching. I mean, I'm willing to answer any questions that anyone has about my views. I really just wanted to explain my opinions and try to further explain why I don't think this should be rated. So, sorry I posted a YTP video before this, I guess. I wasn't exactly expecting to make this. That kind of looks offensive, but I really wasn't expecting to make this video beforehand. And I might do something on the 10th anniversary relating to it. I'm probably just going to make a poll or whatever. But yeah, the reason I didn't make this video on like the 10th anniversary was simply because I saw a poll and I was like, this is really disrespectful. I want to like maybe try to. I would love if some chain reaction started and like a lot of people started unrating the album. Originally when I listened to this album, I didn't understand why there was unrated reviews, but now I understand. And I think that's awesome that there's people who already realized this before I did. I was like, oh, they rated an NR? Why wouldn't they just rate it in 100? I understand that. So I'm glad I came to that realization. So thank you for watching my video. And let me know what you think. Have a good night, or day, or evening. Bye.